Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a cool review for you from the brand Astor+Banks. Now, a little bit about them. They're an independent US-based micro brand started by Andrew Perez to produce something that he absolutely loved. And these watches are also assembled in Chicago out of the good old US of A, which is fantastic. In terms of the type of watch, these watches I would consider everyday watches. And some key common characteristics in design language: when you're looking for something that you can wear every day, you're going to really want that versatile blend of sporty and dressy attributes. Now, this model is known as their Fortitude, and it was inspired by traditional officers' watches. The Fortitude is a great everyday watch with the versatility to go from formal to casual any day of the week. Now, you can find these when they are in stock in between $650 and $695 direct, depending on the configuration. I really enjoy the specs on these. They're only 38.5 millimeters, but they do, I'd say, wear a little bit smaller due to their kind of dial to bezel ratios. They're only 11.3 millimeters thick, and in terms of the lug to lug, only 45.5 millimeters lug to lug. So they are going to wear really nicely. They do have a very nice taper on these bracelets as well, which is fantastic. And then they also do offer all the things that you like in terms of finely polished chamfers and drilled lugs. So there's a lot to love here, and some of you are looking at these and saying, oh man, these are super on trend in terms of all these different colorways that kind of became, I think, very mainstream in terms of the Datejust, as Rolex was revamping those, and then we've seen recently Omega follow suit. I will say that Astor+Banks actually was doing this kind of before it was cool, so props to them because they're offering a lot of different dials. I would say even the ones that I have here aren't even all of them. There's blue dials and mint dials, but these are the ones that they sent in. I was really interested to see how this piece wore and represented it in real life, but I'm going to focus on the one here front and center, which I believe is the peach dial. Some might call it a salmon, but man, it wears beautifully, and it's not a colorway I would typically really jump at. So the fact that they were able to kind of get me to stray away from, my very monochromatic preferences, I think is a real testament to their design language. So with all of that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get these pieces in hand, and really take a closer look. All right, guys, so there's a lot to enjoy here, but let's focus on the one that I actually did spend some time with on the wrist. Of course, everything is pretty much going to be the same except for the dial. And this piece, the way that the light captures this very nice satiny sheen on that dial is really quite handsome. You're going to notice that you're getting kind of a gunmetal gray, kind of black chrome coloration in terms of the surrounds on the indices as well as the finish on the hands. Everything is loomed, which is quite sporty, but I think the nice thing is the actual aesthetic is still quite clean and feels like it could be very versatile and dressy. And then you do get that kind of reverse Y profile on these single links, which do have a beautiful taper down to 16 millimeters, which I can really appreciate. Now, in terms of some of the other colorways, let's go ahead and just take a quick look at these. I'll set this down for now. You're going to have this really nice mother of pearl dial. Check that out with the blued handset and surrounds, really beautiful. And then you also get the kind of sector section a little bit more prominent because it's actually done in blue versus it being kind of stepped, as you'll see on the other dials. So this one was a real looker. I was almost torn to say, hey, maybe I should try this one on. I think the nice thing is if you're looking at something like this, it has great texture, great color play. And it doesn't seem too feminine. I think that can kind of be the tough part when it comes to mother of pearl dials. But I think that the execution here and the choice, it all plays really nicely with the blued hands. So those little other hues that come in, I think work really, really well and in the watch's favor. Now, in terms of these two, you're probably thinking, oh, these are the same. No, they're actually not. This is a white dial, and this is a silver dial. So this is a nice thing you can get a better look at. So the white dial option has you can see kind of those black chrome hands versus the silver dial, which has everything blued by contrast. Also, you'll notice that this white dial doesn't have the kind of sector section at all there, which is very interesting. And I think the more stark kind of layout is quite nice. I don't even know if this one was ever offered or if this is, just a prototype that never came to be, but I think it looks great. And it's nice to see the difference between you can see a pale silver dial versus a true white dial. So very nice, because a lot of the times you'll kind of buy something that's optically white, but it's really a pale silver dial, versus here you can see what a truly white dial looks like. So very nice to see those side by side. I'll go ahead and get them out of screen. And then the last two here, you're going to have kind of this nice sunny, bright kind of citrusy dial, and then this kind of sandy tan dial. Both of them very nice. Both of them with a very similar sheen and shimmer to the dials there. Very nice, because you get a little bit of a warmer tone versus the white style dials that you were seeing earlier. And then, ultimately the peach being kind of the deepest tone there. But if you do want something that will be a little bit more versatile, I'd say this is nice and a little bit more warm and earthy. So if you did want to throw it on, let's say a leather strap, I think that would tie in beautifully. Versus here, definitely going to be a little bit more pop with that kind of yellow, that dial, very bright, citrusy, but at the same time, still, I'd say a tint pale. So it doesn't look cartoonish in any way. This is definitely something that is just a shade below gold almost, right? Like I could say that some might call this a pale gold dial. For me, yeah, it's really just kind of a pale, I guess a yellowish color, but I think it renders really beautifully in person. So let's get those off of camera and focus here, on the watch that I actually spent the most time with in terms of on the wrist. So in terms of some of the details, guys, as I mentioned, drilled lugs, fantastic. 20 millimeter lug width, great. Miyota 9015 inside of here, even though these are no date models. So it might be a 9039 or a 905S, depending, the next times or however many iterations these will come out again and be re-released in terms of their batches. But it is a Miyota 90 or 9000 series movement, which is great. And it's actually regulated in 4 positions. Yes, 4 positions, which is fantastic. And is something that you will see in terms of a lot of these US-based micro brands that do the assembly here within the States, but then of course are sourcing their parts from overseas. Now, in terms of the rest of this particular watch, it actually does also have, although you can't see it, it has soft iron plates inside, which means that it exceeds ISO 764 for anti-magnetic requirements and is tested up to 20,000 AM, which I think is quite fantastic. And especially for a watch that looks this fun, vibrant, and and wearable, for it to actually be quite capable, that's something that you might find typically in something German, in terms of being overbuilt. There aren't too many watches within this kind of price point that really take that into consideration when it comes to anti-magnetism. Now, in terms of the dials, of course, there are various dials. They all do have applied indices with matching hands that finish, and you're pretty much going to get it either in some type of polished handset, but it's going to be either kind of a smoked finish, a gilt, or a blued hand finish, in this case smoked, and everything is nicely lumed. Even that seconds hand, very thinly done, but still quite nice. Now, in terms of the lume on here, you're going to be getting Swiss Superluminova X1, so pretty much top of the line, most modern stuff you'll find in 2022. At the time of filming this. The water resistance on here is great, 660 feet or 200 meters of water resistance. You are getting a screw down crown, which is signed, and look at that profile. Look at those bevels, really nicely done. And then it has quite a nice shape to this fixed bezel, which has a flat vertical brush across, and then you're going to be getting nice high polish, round, kind of curvaceous shape to it. So really, really nice. And a lot of times when brands will kind of do something apart from a 3-link, just for the sake of doing something that isn't a 3-link style, it's hit or miss for me. But in this case, I think this reverse Y single layout looks really cool, and they're very short, so it helps with the articulation, and it just makes it seem really, really balanced, which I like. And I think in terms of the lines of the watch, it flows really, really nicely. Now, it does have screw pin connectors, as you can see. So no push pins here, as long as you have small enough screwdrivers specifically for watches and links, you'll be good to go. And then you're going to get fully milled clasp here, as well as a bevy of manual micro adjust holes. You're also getting that nice high polished finish there in terms of a nice accent. And then everything fully milled over here, and then signed on the V buckle Astor+Banks or Astor+Banks. So very nice from that perspective. You can see there's a bit of wear from the kind of sharper finished edge underneath here, touching that articulation. But you know, that kind of comes with the territory generally. When it comes to really most any watch, there's very few watches that are able to kind of design their way out of that, and most of them are going to cost a lot more. But I do love the proportions of this nice taper there. Look at that. Very, very classic there, nice and thin, which also helps the watch have just a really nice flow on the wrist. Now, speaking of on the wrist, let's go ahead and get it on there and see how it wears. All right, guys, check that out. On my 7¼ inch wrist, even wearing it a bit higher on the wrist bone there, so maybe even a touch closer to 7½ inches, it looks and wears really well. Even if I get really close, you get that lens distortion that makes the watch's head feel a little bit larger. But you can see down here that more at regular kind of sight, as if you were looking at it, it still looks quite nice. I will say that for those of you that are looking for things kind of in that 38 to 36 range, this definitely fits the bill, even though it's 38.5, because it has, in terms of proportional, you know, specs, it has a smaller dial, and then it has a relatively thick bezel, and then it has a kind of short, fat body in terms of that nice compact 45.5 lug to lug there. So for those of you that have kind of liked the idea of a 36, but maybe they're just too small for you, something like this at 38.5 can give you a lot of that versatility and that look, and that particular aesthetic, but in something that's going to be more wearable for larger wrists like myself. So very nice. And you can see, look at that. Look at the way those short links articulate and just drape over the wrist. You can see not too many tricks in terms of the case there, besides that beautiful beveled edge. Look at how shiny that is, and it just captures the light. Great sharp transition without being sharp in terms of feeling unfinished, and it just flows and wraps around the wrist really nicely. Nicely signed crown, very simply done, but still done nice. And then yeah, it's a nice kind of mixture of you know, those curves, as well as a couple of kind of flat angular lines as well, which I dig. You can see the lines within those indices in the kind of baton style, but then they do have slightly rounded tips there. And then you have a very rounded case, but a nice flat bevel. You also have this bracelet with short links that make it sit kind of round around your wrist, but then you have the straight lines as well. So there's a lot of play in between curves and straight, and I dig that. They did a good job kind of mixing that up and mashing it up up without it being overly angular, which might make it seem a bit too modern and contemporary. And then if it being overly round can make it a bit too sporty and playful. So I liked that there was a balance there and a really deliberate design aspect that I think works in its favor in terms of making it very versatile. And that's exactly what the mission of this watch is, because it can go from formal to casual, or I should, like, not black tie, you know, formal, maybe. I guess, it could. It has the scale for it. But definitely, suit and tie, maybe not bow tie, tuxedo level, but I think suit and tie, but also can be shorts and flip-flops, especially when you get a vibrant colorway such as this. But let's actually get this off the wrist, get some Lume shots in there, working some low light transition and closing thoughts. Okay, guys, so I put a couple more watches in sight here that are going to have those more dynamic dials in terms of the way that the light will play. But I couldn't fit them all in the frame, so hopefully these are the ones you wanted to see. We do have that satin pale silver, and of course the kind of peachy salmon there in the middle, and then the amazing mop dial, mother of pearl. So let's hit the lights. All right, as you can see, very, very nice. Just like you'd expect, BGW9 glowing really, really nicely. But let's get to the fun part, which is going to be the low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to be coming in and out of a building, walking underneath an overhang, maybe the shade of, ooh, look at that mother of pearl dial, goodness. And then that pale silver in terms of the way that it plays with the light, rendering very white. Ooh, look at that center dial actually looks very, very orange in kind of mixed lighting. So even if I get into some very harsh lighting conditions here, very high contrast, you can see that in terms of revealing much on the brushing there, I think still done to quite a nice standard, especially for a watch under $1,000. Very, very clean there. No real defects that I would report. I think the uniformity of the light over the brushing looks quite nice. But you can see there that, in less than optimal lighting, mixed lighting conditions, this is still a very, very legible watch, which I really can enjoy. Again, they went through the trouble of making it very, very functional as well as extremely handsome, and I appreciate that. Look at the way that the light just grabs those bezels, that flat brush. Look at the way it glides over those dials. That faint sector inner ring there, which helps kind of break down the dial weight and make it feel a little bit smaller in a really cool kind of trick design way. So I really do appreciate that. And again, guys, there are tons of variations of these, but for me, I'm kind of torn. I'm really digging that kind of peachy salmon color. It's just, I found it more versatile, and I don't know, I think that color ends up being an accent on a lot more kind of men's clothing these days. And then it does do a great job of kind of blending with earthy tone stuff, as well as, brighter colors, summery kind of florals and Hawaiian shirts. Stuff like that, which, I find myself wearing quite a bit in terms of pretty much always wearing a collar, except for, maybe on the weekend or something for the kids' sporting events. So in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, smaller, more classic proportions, very comfortable, balanced wear. The smaller dial proportions and short lug to lug do help it wear, I think, visually smaller as well. So even though it's quite compact physically, I think the visual weight is really managed and maintained and tight and trim in terms of the way that it looks. It really wears similarly to my Formex Essence 39 in terms of scale and proportions, where it is, at 39 millimeters, but with a kind of thicker bezel and a smaller dial, it helps that watch wear even smaller, while it doesn't feel undersized because it actually has, you know, quite a perfect footprint on the wrists, which is nice. Now, in terms of model variants, guys, tons of options. Definitely check their site for availability. Again, these are just the ones that have been floating around, I think, the review queues. So I'm really happy that they sent them in. In terms of comparable models, I think these watches are really nice alternatives to things like the Zen 556, the Seiko Prospex Alpinist, you know, just within that vein of being very versatile, kind of almost dressy, but still very rugged, tough, and capable. Bottom line here, guys, as you know, while these watches are in the same vein as something like your Traska Summitier or Orion Hellcat, the Fortitude brings along its own signature charm, and I can totally understand why it's so often quick to go out of stock. Like there's a reason why these are selling out as soon as they come into stock, because they're very desirable and very versatile. I'm not a one watch collection kind of guy. I have problems. I have way too many watches, but I definitely do see the value of having at least one of these variations inside of your collection, especially if you pride yourself in kind of collecting those, you know, offshoots and micro brands and just those little fun, quirky, passionate brands that are out there. So Andrew Perez, good on you for producing these, just because you love them, and I'm sure I understand why now after spending some quality time with these pieces. You know, why so many others love them as well. So with that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you liked the video, please do hit like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.